To have them at this interaction, I just want to recall a few things about them. They came to my office almost two or 3 weeks ago before they departed to Langtang for a trek. And then I just noted out one plan to have them for interaction with us, and they were readily agreed for us to come over here on April 13th. And today is the New Year's Eve for Nepal, you know very well, because they have already visited to Biscuit Jatra a couple of days before. So they understand, they know more about Nepal. And they actually, they are the, I should call them the travelers as well as the writers, because they keep on traveling as well as posting their travel experience in their own website that is called We Said Go Travel.com. That is the one. If you just open that website, you can see their postings, their photographs, their videos, everything about their traveling. And they are the allied members of a club which only allow to enter a person who have crossed the traveling of 100 countries. So they are the members of a special allied travelers group. It means that they have already traveled more than 100 countries, so which is quite interesting thing for us. And now they are planning to write books on travel also about their travel experience. So today Lisa and George will tell us their experience, and Mr. Kundan Sharma, he is the Secretary of Leaders Club Nepal, who will moderate the session. And now because we have already delayed for 15 minutes, so I just beg pardon for the delay, because you know the problem is in Nepal, because we have already known this delay. So before we proceed to our program, I would like to request our participants, our friends, to introduce themselves, because just more you just introduce yourself not as something like little bit bored, so that it is easier for them to speak to us, because they know who the audience are. It's better for them to understand who the people that are speaking to, rather than plainly your introductions was it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, so it's better for them to tell us more about their experience, targeting the group.
Hello, good morning everyone. I am Hari Adhikari. I belong to Readers Club. I have done my Masters in English Literature, and I have done my Bachelor's in Sanskrit Literature as well. I am running an educational consultancy, and I see their academic program. I teach for the students regarding the students who are planning further study abroad, and I teach them TOEFL, IELTS courses as well. And apart from that, I love to read, and I write sometimes. Thank you.
I'm Mr. Kulala.
What do you do?
I'm reading in school. I belong to class 6.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ajit Barak. I run a publishing house called Fine Print, and I do a little bit of writing as well.
Profession and central banker. I work in central bank. My interest, I would like to travel and like travel essays and poetry. Namaste, I am Kushal. I am from Eastern Nepal, and one of the members of Readers Club Nepal, and I am a student of Masters English Literature. And apart from reading, I am very much obsessed with reading literature and visiting and writing too. And as I am from eastern part of Nepal, and I have some good experiences of visiting some beautiful places of eastern part of Nepal, like Kathmandu and Darjeeling.
Namaste, it's me, Yogesh Pandit. I have been teaching in some of the colleges, and I love reading and at the same time traveling, though I haven't traveled a lot. But I love traveling, and I love listening to people.
Namaste, my name is Abhishek. I'm from Iran, the eastern part of Nepal. And I do myself travel. And recently I made research on Kumari, the universe. And I myself read these travel items, and I'm very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
Very pleased to have you here because I'm from a different background. I'm an economist. My name is Gaurav Bhattarai.
Namaste, my name is Deepak and I am originally from western parts of Nepal. Currently I am at Nepal Tourism Board working as senior officer for publicity. I love to read travel writing, more than that I love travel. Thank you.
Namaste, I'm Govind Devi. I'm originally from the western part of Nepal, called Sanyan district. And from academic background, I'm a student of literature English. So I have been involved in tourism for the last decade, working in a tourism as an officer. And my interest is traveling. I like travel. I love to travel a lot. And I'm a new participant here in this function organized by Rivers Club. First time I'm participating in a function organized by Rivers Club. Especially very enthusiastic to learn something out of your traveling experience sharing.
Namaste, I am Prabhakar and I have done my master's in English literature and I teach English literature as well as I read. I love to read literature and I'm a member of the Rivers Club.
School, name of the school. Pioneer School.
Everybody, I am Mr. Manipur. From old Nepal, organization working culture, mass communication. I already visit more than 60 districts in Nepal. My hobby is to travel.
Last part. Oh, no, sir.
I am also I actually live in
Mail.com. Mail.com.
I love to travel. I love to travel, and the program I love
A couple of days before. So, now I request Kundan Sharma to moderate this session. I think there's no any kind of limitation, any kind of bar to moderate, so it's up to you how to take it.
Thank you, sir. Try to be as informal as possible so that we can share our experience. When I went through your website, this visit good travel.com, really amazed by your
I definitely first started traveling. First of all, I have to say thank you to all of you for being here. It's such an amazing group of quite a collection of people, writers and teachers, and we are so excited to be here and honored to be invited to the group. And we actually had a couple things to share too. So we wanted to say a little bit about Nepal. And we've been traveling since July on this particular trip. We were away in 2008 for a year, and we've been away now about 10 months. But I want to tell you, when we come to a place, we try really hard to learn the language. So we were in India for 3 months, and we crossed the border into Nepal and went to Lumbini, and then we were in Tansin. And I was trying so hard to learn to speak Nepali, and I learned to say, Merhabar, USA. Most people laugh because, I'm speaking Nepali. And then we went to this very nice restaurant in Tansin, Nepal, and George and I were trying so hard to learn how to say Malai et Kukur Momodinus. And everyone stared at me. I was like, no, I learned how to say this yesterday. Malai et Kukur Momodinus. And everyone looked at me and said, Kukur Momo Mito China. And I said, well, I learned it. And they said, no, Kukur, ruff, 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 Kukura, Mito China. So sometimes one of the things we found with our website and writing is sometimes it's very hard to communicate well. You think that you're saying something and people understand you, and they really don't understand you. Like, we've been writing for different places. I wrote an article in the Myanmar Times, and we wrote an article. We're going to write something for the Himalayan Times. I was talking with this lady who has a magazine in India, and I said, oh, I want to write this article. And she was, oh, in India we don't think that's a festival. Because in Indonesia we went to a cremation. She's like, in India that's not so special. We do that. So it's interesting when you move from one country to another, what you see. So George and I took our first trip how we started traveling. He's going to share something with you, which is the first time. So George and I have a novel that we've been working on about our trip, and is the first international reading of the excerpt from our book. You know?
No, that's just an answer's question.
Oh.
Yeah, I started traveling from my parents, basically. They were travelers, and they inspired me to start traveling around. And so I started doing that with them. And then when I turned 18, I could do things on my own. I traveled with 2 friends over the summer to Europe. And I loved it so much that I just kept traveling, literally ever since I was 18. And I just kept traveling and traveling. And eventually, when I met her, I was looking for someone who was also into international travel. And we took a leave of absence for a year, saved money, and traveled for 1 year mostly around Asia. We didn't make it to Nepal or India on that trip, but we traveled around mainly Southeast Asia. So it's been a continual thing for me for literally like 30, I don't want to say how long time, almost 30 years.
So is this your first visit to Nepal?
This is my second trip ever.
Been there just about 2 months.
So, Lisa, you are a science teacher and you are a nominee for this. You are a nominee for the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Maths and Science Teaching.
Hopefully we're going to hear soon.
How do you relate these things?
How
do you get time? You travel a lot, and how
That's
do
a
you
good
manage?
question. So I'll answer your first question too. So like George, I started traveling with my parents, and I was able to travel when I was a teenager. I spent a summer in Israel, and because of that experience, I decided during college I wanted to travel. So I spent a semester abroad in Jerusalem. And George also studied abroad in Switzerland. So we were able to combine our studies and our love of travel. And when I graduated from college, I really loved science. And I actually went to medical school for a brief time in America. I went to medical school and I decided it wasn't the right place for me. And I ended up traveling. And I worked for, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the organization called Club Med. It's a French kind of all-inclusive resort. So I worked for them, and after that I found my way onto a cruise ship, and I worked for about 6 years sailing. So that's part of how I they would pay for our flights, and then you live on the boat. It's a floating hotel, so that was definitely a great way to travel. I don't always think all the positions are so great, but for me, it was a really wonderful experience. So I traveled, and then George and I, it's a priority for us to travel. But as far as the science, travel has been a way for my students to really, really connect with issues. So I've shared with my students a project from the Congo. We wrote to President Obama and asked for his help. We've been involved with some projects in Los Angeles around beaches and the water, and we've written to a lot of political officials. So I think that travel and science have a lot in common.
How many countries have you visited? Because you are already a club member, so it is more than 100. So how many exact? What are you doing in Nepal?
Well, I believe with Nepal, I think I'm at 110, but we have to have a little caveat on the Traveler's Century Club. The Traveler's Century Club counts a greater number of total countries than the United Nations. So the Traveler's Century Club was actually started in Los Angeles, and they have about 2,000 members. And you know, when you make up your own club, you get to make up your own rules. So they count any country that's ethnographically, geographically, or politically diverse in their terms. So for the United States, they actually count Alaska, continental United States, and Hawaii. And then all the territories, Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, all, Guam are all additional. So on the United Nations list, we're smaller, but on the...
And what about you?
Close to about the same number of countries, but like you said, not really necessarily exactly 100. I think maybe 108 or something like that.
So since you have traveled so many countries, so tell us about your best experiences also, and the worst experience. You might have faced some worst experiences also. Till there.
Sure. One of my best experiences was on our first long trip when we were in Thailand after we'd been away about 6 months. We went snorkeling one day, and while we were snorkeling around underwater, George had a ring, and so he kept calling me, "Come over here," and I was like, "No, I'm tired, I'm going in." He's like, "No, come here." And so when I got there, I found the ring, and that was the day George asked me to marry.
Oh, that was so romantic. So romantic.
That was a good day.
I'll do a bad day. Because that would have to be my best day too, was actually getting married to Lisa. So, wow, bad day. Well, I'd say one of my worst experiences was in Brazil. And I was traveling in the far north, and it was without her. I was traveling by myself. And it was in the daytime, and I was just walking along the beach. And I was not even thinking about where I was, just my mind was somewhere else. And I was just walking, and I had my sandals, just holding them here, and I had a bag here. And these two guys came up to me, and they said in Portuguese, in Brazilian, they said, "dinheiro," which means money. And I thought they were just begging. So I was like, "No, I don't have money." And I started walking. And then the next thing I knew, I heard one of them say, "Elogi." And I was like, "Elogi? That means watch." And this is when I realized they meant watch. They're grabbing my watch, and they didn't, and they were grabbing it, and their fingernails were going into my skin, so it was hurting. So I had to fight. And when I tried to throw a punch, the watch fell off, and he fell on the ground, and I fell on the ground, and then they ran away, and I ran over here. And so it was my bad experience being attacked on the beach, especially in daylight. If you think everything's fine, even some people were running by that didn't even, they didn't notice. So I'd say that was a scary experience, even though it wasn't that bad. It could have been a lot worse, but it was a scary, bad experience. It was the only time in my many years of travel that I had a problem like that, being attacked by someone. So that was probably like one of my worst experiences.
How do you are a speech therapist?
Yes.
You
usually what she always tells me to say is, I don't know if you've seen the movie The King's Speech. Okay, so The King's Speech was working with, the person that was working with the king to help him talk better. That's kind of the job I do. And when I say bilingual, I work with people in English and Spanish. Because in Los Angeles, there's a big Latino population. And so I work with people in English and Spanish working on their speech. And it's not only necessarily stuttering to see how they make sounds, but vocabulary.
Since you have traveled so many countries, how do you see Nepal as a traveling destination? Please share your experience. How do you see Nepal as a traveling destination? How attractive is it, or what are its intentions? How do you see Nepal?
I was just thinking, just before we started, I was thinking about how when we came from India into Nepal, it was such a big change. Literally, right across something like Lumbini might be 10 kilometers from the border of India, and it just went so much more calm and relaxed in Nepal than India. The people immediately became more friendly. In India, many times someone hit me by accident, and just like rubbing into me, they never say excuse me or anything. And then literally all that happened, some girl hit me, she's like, oh, I'm very sorry. Oh, wow. So much more polite, I noticed. And I also read that something like 40% of people, or maybe it's even higher, tourists that come to Nepal come back. And I'm the second, so I'm part of that. This is my second time here. And I think there's a lot that Nepal has to offer. You were telling us that the best resource in Nepal is its people. I remember when we met with you, and I would agree with that. The people here are really nice, and we really enjoy meeting a lot of Nepali. And then also, of course, you have the most amazing mountains in the world, and also just all the culture. So we saw, and we went to the biscuit jatra the other day. Just seeing something like that is we have nothing like that in America. So it's just seeing ancient cities and things like that for me are all part of what makes Nepal an appealing destination.
Lisa, since you know that it's around 110, so why is Nepal the 110?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. Nepal, well, part of the reason Nepal is 110 is because remember I said I made a lot of trips on the cruise ship? No boats are here. So that's one reason. A lot of my early travel was, when George and I first started traveling together, he'd say to me, oh, did you go to this place? And I would say, oh no. And he's, why did you go there? I said, it's not on the coast. So the first few times I was in India, I was on the boat. And then he's like, why did you go here? We were in Myanmar. He's like, why did you go to Shwedagon Pagoda and not Bagan? It's not on the coast. So that's one reason. But the real reason is I didn't come to Nepal sooner is because I was afraid. It's true. George wanted to come on our first big trip, and I didn't think that I could be a trepper. I was very nervous, and I didn't know all the stories, the very few stories I ever heard about Nepal and America from other travelers were always about the tallest mountains, and I was worried. And no one ever told me about the amazing ancient cities and the incredible animals, the beautiful Lake of Pokhara. So I think one problem is I didn't know enough about Nepal. And we certainly, on our website, have started to share some of the amazing things like our pictures of Boda, and we saw rhinos. Our last name is Rhina. So I made a post that said, the rhinos saw rhinos. But don't say it 3 times fast. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I didn't realize how much there was to see in Nepal. So I'm very glad to be here. We've already talked about when we're coming back.
You have been to developing countries like this place. Despite having so much potential, we are not able to attract as much tourists as we would have. So what do you think is the major reason behind our lagging back? Because you felt the difference when you came from India. Lots of tourists talk about these differences. And still, we are not having volumes of tourists. Are we lagging behind something, or are we missing the point? What is your experience? Similar countries, similar developing countries are doing well in comparison.
I wasn't aware of that. I'm not sure.
I think issue in terms of American tourism has a lot to do with timing, and the vast majority of Americans have 10 or more days holiday. In Europe they have a much greater number of weeks of holiday. And one issue I think is that plane flights airfare has gotten much more expensive. And so if you're flying from Los Angeles or New York to Kathmandu, you lose a lot of your 10 days just in the getting over here. So I think one thing is definitely letting people know that there's so many different things to do, and that Nepal is an incredibly reasonable travel destination. And the food is great and not outrageously priced. We've been some places that we consider more also developed countries where the value of the accommodation is terrible. So Nepal has a lot of things going for it. I'm not sure how much people know about Nepal in America. I think that might be part of it.
So we need to promote it.
I'm not sure. For me personally, that's
So, about travel writing, do you have any favorite writers? And if you have, then who are those?
Actually, we were going to pass this out later, but I did promise we're going to get one to everyone. That's not enough. So I just put a very few of my favorite writers just on the bottom here. And two of them are not just travel writers. Well, actually, none of them really are just travel writers. But my favorite of all of the three that are on the list is James Michener. He's probably my favorite travel writer. I love how he incorporates true history into his fictional work. And I really doesn't make it. And in fact, he's written my favorite book ever, which is called Resource. And it's a big book. It's not a short read. It's quite long, 1,000 pages, I believe. So I love it, and I recommend it to anyone. In addition to James Michener, I also wrote James Clavell. He's another writer that has huge books. And his most famous one is Shogun, and it's all about China. But my favorite one's Kathmandu, which is a little bit shorter, but also a great book. And then the third one we put down is Paul Thoreau. He writes a lot about train journeys. He loves going in trains and traveling in trains. And we actually met him in Los Angeles. He did a book signing, and we met him personally. And I'm a Peace Corps volunteer from Paraguay in South America, and he was also a Peace Corps volunteer, so we had that in common. But those are three of my favorite writers that are related to travel, even though they're only writing about travel, but I love all three of them.
So we would also love to hear the excerpt from your book. So we'll do that later on. We'll do that. So people, there are lots of people who want to write, but there is a fear that they might make a mistake. That is pulling them behind. How do you overcome this fear? Did you feel the same, or how did you start writing? Because you have already been writing.
I think it's just like a process that you just do it and you just start. And maybe in the beginning you're not that happy with what you did, or maybe you get lucky and you are. But we just kept and you continually revise. I mean, like even the book that we have here, after editing it and then re-editing it again and again, it's still like I could read it now and say like, hey, maybe make it a little bit better. So you always can go back and question what you wrote. And I think at some point you just say, okay, we're gonna turn this article in, and we've been publishing now for a while. We've written a lot of things. So I think that we've improved our writing, and our confidence has gone up when we start getting published to different places. So that helps us with confidence. But what do you think?
I'd like to say something about that, because I think that is a huge issue. I think that people are afraid. And I read a marketing person, his name is Seth Godin. He's written a lot of very internationally famous books. He wrote Purple Cow, he wrote Lynchpin, The Dip, and he has a very short email that goes out every day. And when we were first working on the website, the blog, and our first draft of the book, he was writing a lot about, he wrote something, this is artist ship. And he goes over, uses the same things over and over again. He said, if you write something and no one reads it, it doesn't count. If you are an artist, you send your work out in the world. And it doesn't matter if you think it's ready you have to keep, he uses the term shipping. You have to keep shipping. So about 2 years ago, I did my first talk in Los Angeles, and we hosted a lot of different events in LA. And I was very concerned, like, how could I talk about Morocco, and was it the right thing? And I had a lot of people say, you can't do it here. And one of the people, the place where I was going to have it, he said, well, no one will come. And I said, well, that's okay. I'll be there by myself. And he said, they were so discouraging. And I just, the whole time I kept thinking about Seth Good, artist ship, artist ship. And I didn't like my flyer, and I sent it anyway. And I didn't like the place, and I did it anyway. And then we had about 30 people show up, and because of that event, we ended up getting invited to write for the paper in Los Angeles called the Jewish Journal. So we've had a blog there for almost 2 years now. And because we were on that, things start, once you start, you go, oh, you do that? Okay, well, would you like to be host of this event? I'm like, okay. So I think one of the most important things is even if you're not sure, you have to start. When we were deciding, George knew he wanted to go away for a year on the first trip. And it was his dream. And he invited me, and I said yes, and then I wasn't sure. And I started thinking about how would I feel if he went without me. And I think about that a lot, about publishing our books. Like, how will you feel if it doesn't happen? Because it's a risk. You might fail, but if you don't try, definitely.
You plan your travel, your travel plan for almost a year. So how do you plan these things? Do you plan in advance everything, or 1 year travel is also how do you plan it? How do you plan these things? How do you which countries are to be visited and where do you want to stay? Or do you plan everything in advance before traveling, or things will move on? How do you do these things? This long travel.
Yeah, no, we planned nothing in advance at all, nothing. The only thing we did with airline miles, we got a ticket from Los Angeles to Bali, which is where we started our trip. And it cost us, for both of us to go, it cost us $50. And that was it.
Because we miles.
Using miles.
Yeah, you might have lots of free tickets.
Yeah, we're hoping for more free tickets, yeah, because it helps a lot. But yeah, so, and once we got to Bali, we had some ideas of what we wanted to do. And then when we looked at the air flights, how expensive it was, we had to change. We said, no, we cannot do this because it was really, really pricey. And it was high season in Indonesia. So we changed and just stayed in Bali and Lombok area. So we saved a lot of money by not flying where we wanted to. We did have one flight out of Indonesia to Phuket in Thailand. And that was the only thing we didn't have planned. So we flew there to Phuket after 2 months. And then from there, we didn't know what we were going to do. And literally to show you how things are not planned, we decided to buy a ticket to go to Calcutta from Thailand. And my plan was to go to northern India. But when I saw how cold it was after we purchased the ticket, I said, we can't go to northern India, it's too cold. So we changed our mind, we went to southern India, and we just kept going south instead of north from Calcutta. And after traveling for months in India, I was thinking that we were heading over to see Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, which is supposed to go to Varanasi. And I read in the book that we could go from Varanasi into Lumbini in Nepal, where we could see Buddha's birthplace. I said, we've got to do this. We can get into Nepal. And then she was finally thinking, okay, I can do it. I can try. I can handle Nepal. So literally, that's how it happened. It was not. And then the plan. We're going to where you went on your last trip. We're going to Malaysia in 2 days' time. And that happened by literally, we were looking at flights. And there's this program, an application called Skyscanner. You can literally put in Kathmandu, and then anywhere, the cheapest flights, and then you can see where it's economical to fly to. And the cheapest flights we saw were to Kuala Lumpur. Well, actually, the cheapest flight was to Delhi. We didn't want to go back to India. Second cheapest was Pokhara. More expensive to go to Pokhara. And our piece is running out, so we had to leave. But anyway, and then after that, I think it was like Thailand, Bangkok, and Kuala Lumpur. So it was just part of it's based on price we decide because we can't. We're traveling for a long time, so we can't just say, oh, we'll just spend a lot of money and fly wherever. So we base it on price also.
But it also depends what happens. Like when we arrived in Indonesia, we discovered it was going to be Ramadan. And one of the places we thought about going was Sulawesi, which is very Muslim. And I traveled on the cruise ship in different parts of the Arab world during Ramadan one time, and it better stay in Bali. And so, you know, I have to take into account what's culturally appropriate, that, you know, where do we want to be, or, you know, that we found out once there was a royal cremation in Ubud over in Indonesia, so we arranged to be there. Just like he said a couple of days ago, we were at Biscuit Jatra. So we try to, if we find out about something interesting, make sure that we can take advantage of it. And the other thing is, when we were looking on the Sky Scanner, we call that dice of price. We'll go wherever it kind of works out. One of the places that was a pretty cheap flight was Beirut in Lebanon. And so we thought maybe instead of going back to Southeast Asia, we'd go to the Middle East. But it turns out it's actually not so cheap there. So.
Yeah, it was really expensive. So that,
it didn't exactly fit our budget.
So in this trip, from you began your journey from Indonesia. So how long is this going on?
In this trip, we were 2 months in Indonesia, and then we were, some of it depends on the visas. So we were a month in Thailand. You get a 30-day visa with an American passport when you fly in. And then did we go to Burma? Then we were in Myanmar for 27 days, because you get a 28-day visa. And then we were back in Thailand, and we figured out that in Chiang Mai we could get the India visa. And we were able to get a 3-month India visa, so we stayed about 2.5 months. And then here in Nepal, we've been here, and then we're going. Malaysia has a 90-day visa for free.
Oh.
So I do think that's something that matters. You know, when we talk to other travelers, especially backpackers, people talk about Bhutan and how no one's going. And I think it's intentional, the price, you know, the Bhutan has talked about, they want their country to have a certain kind of traveler, and they charge a lot. So Malaysia has definitely wants travelers, and they give the visa, and it's easy to get an extension. Thailand has made it much more challenging. If you go overland, you get 15 days. So it's interesting how that impacts travelers, especially backpackers' decisions.
I think many of our friends might have different things to ask here.
But before that, could you tell us how did you meet? Because it's quite interesting that I read you. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, this kind of sets up the book also. So our book is about basically how we met and it led to our year adventure away together, and eventually getting engaged, like you said, underwater in Thailand, and then later getting married after we returned to the United States. But we met online, and so a lot of people think that's kind of, it was something that I didn't want to do in the beginning of the book, but I just didn't think it was for me, and a friend of mine talked me into it. And when I originally wrote her, she was actually the very first person I wrote.
Do you want to read that?
Yeah, that would be great. We want to listen to the excerpt.
Because this whole part isn't there.
Okay, I guess this is it. If I can read it, it's very small writing and light stuff. Okay, so just to say, well, just to, I can read it, it's just very small. Anyways, but just to set this up, this is the prologue of our book, and this is the first time I'm reading it, or either of us are reading it to anyone. She gave it to her mom, so she's read the part, but you're the first people that are hearing it. And this is sort of this is before we met, and this is sort of my mentality at the time as I was turning about 40 years old, and what I was kind of thinking before we met. So here's the prologue. True love, soulmates. As the dawn of my 40th birthday loomed, these words seemed more like terminology or even cinema-driven fantasy than anything the realm of my reality. During my 20s and 30s, I was involved in you read it?
During my 20s and 30s, I was involved in a few on and off romances, but nothing that led to permanence. Either myself or one of my partners eventually pulling the curtains closed. So when a close friend suggested that I join Salon.com, an online dating site, I was quite skeptical. In fact, not only was I cynical, but I also deemed online dating for people who could not manage relationships in the real world. Still, my friend urged me to join, stating it's simply another way to meet people. Despite my reservations, I shelled out $36 and began to write a few women who I found attractive and intriguing me based on their online profile. Some responded, while others completely ignored my advances. My first date was with a very attractive amateur yoga guru. We met for a drink at Shay J in Santa Monica, and then she invited me to join her for pizza at another establishment close by on Main Street. I enjoyed her company and felt that a second date was likely. Therefore, I was slightly shocked when I walked her to her car to say goodnight, and she said, "You are nice, but I don't feel any connection." Disappointed, I returned home hoping for better results with my second date in 2 days' time. I guess I should have predicted failure when the freckle-faced redhead's second email read, "I love a Thai restaurant near my apartment, but the fluorescent lighting literally makes me cry." I found the statement strange, but decided to meet with her anyway. We agreed to meet downtown to listen to a speaker who basically blasted George W. Bush as a fraud and a downright fool. A male friend chaperoned her during our date. After listening to the speaker, we left to have coffee. Both she and her friend were amicable, but I knew I would never see either of them again after we departed company. This brings me to my third and final date on Salon.com. My third date with Lisa Nyberg really should have been my first date. Let me explain. After reading her profile, I immediately felt a connection. I suspected that we would at a minimum get along, even if there was no love connection. Unfortunately, Lisa did not respond to my initial email, so I figured she was not interested. I went away on a trip to Indonesia, and when I returned, Salon had sent me some profiles of people, profiles of people that should be interesting. I opened the email and looked over the profiles. One woman was cute, and I could relate to what she had to say about travel and life. I began to write to her when about halfway through the second paragraph, I realized I might have already written her previously. I had pondered, did I write to her already? If so, she wasn't interested. With these thoughts in mind, I still wrote her, but added in closing something like, if I wrote to you already, please disregard this email. But if not, I'd like to meet up with you sometime. You sound interested. And off the email went. I had, in fact, previously written to Lisa. However, this time she responded with the encouragement of a friend. Lisa and I began corresponding over a period of 10 days before we actually met. We never spoke on the phone until after our first initial meeting. Below are the actual emails exchanged from October 8, 2006 through the 18th of January 2007. And then this first email was one never responded to, followed by our actual correspondence.
So then in that part of the book, we have our actual emails that we exchanged over that 10-day period. And so like she said, the first one she never wrote back to, and then the second one we're going to have the exchange.
That was very good.
I think this will definitely inspire a few guys here. So I really request them to try as he did. Try it.
Maybe we can get our website sponsored by Salon.com. It's funny when we travel and we meet people, like we're on the road, and when we were in China, we traveled with a bunch of people for many days. Eventually someone will say to us, how did you guys meet? And they're always so shocked that we met online. I said, why are you surprised that we met online? They said, well, you're so perfect together. And I say, well, George shopped for me. He had a list. So I shouldn't have shopped. So it works for us.
Why did you respond?
Well, good question. George would like to answer. So, unlike George, I was George's third date online. He hadn't spent a lot of time online. I did, when I worked on the cruise ship, shortly after September 11th, my company went bankrupt. And I moved back to California and lived with my parents. I wasn't really sure what to do. And I wasn't so happy. And I was trying to date online very unsuccessfully. I had, you know, I would talk to people, I would have first dates, it just wasn't working out. And honestly, it wasn't fun. And I was frustrated. So when he wrote to me, I really liked